The following program is made possible by the generous support of these sponsors. United Bank, with full-service banking for our community and our veterans from convenient locations. By PGBA, the healthcare claims processor for the American Armed Forces, serving those who serve us. And by Conway Ford, dedicated to serving our communities and our veterans in Horry, Georgetown, and Marion counties. From the campus of Coastal Carolina University, the Center for Military and Veteran Studies is pleased to present Military Memoirs. Hello and welcome to Military Memoirs. I'm Rod Gregg, and our guest for this program is Mr. Roger McGuigan, who served in the U.S. Navy Seabees during the Vietnam War. It's a pleasure to have you here, sir.
Thank you.
Now, we were talking earlier, and you were telling me that growing up in Pennsylvania, you really weren't thinking about being in the Navy.
No, never thought about it. That's correct. I was from a little town called Parksburg, and I did that because we still have high school people who are alive, and so I want to make sure that got out because I'm going to share all this with them when it's over with. Anyhow, I graduated from New England College, and I had a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. I got my friends and neighbors letter, and they said, we want you to go in the Army, and I decided, no, I want to go in the Navy and be an officer. So I signed up, and I had a deferment, and my commission never came through. So I ended up going to Philadelphia and being enlisted Navy. And they said, well, since you're a civil engineer, we're going to make you a plumber and put you in the Seabees. And they did. And so I went to Great Lakes. I went to plumbing school in Oxnard, California at Port Hueneme. And then I got transferred to Mobile Construction Battalion 128, MCB 128 in Gulfport, Mississippi.
So what was that like growing up in that part of Pennsylvania, west of Philadelphia, I think?
Yes, it was in pretty much farm country. The place that we had was 18 acres, and my first one I was born, and we lived in the country, and we grazed some corn and some other things, and we then when I was 8 years old moved into the big city of Parksburg.
Okay, so after high school you said you went to New England College.
That was in Henniker, New Hampshire, New England College, and they had a program for civil engineering, which was building things again. I love that. So
that's what drew you into that field.
That's what drew me into that field,
You loved making things.
Mm-hmm. So I went to New England College, and we went to our first convocation, and there was 30 of us in the program, of which 5 of the original 30 graduated 4 years later.
So out of college?
I went to work for the Pennsylvania Railroad. At the height of Vietnam in 67, 68. I graduated in 1967 from college, 63 from high school. And
so you had a college deferment, presumably?
Yeah, originally, yes.
Right.
So I graduated, and then I went to work for the Pennsylvania Railroad, which also had a deferment, but then I lost the deferment. And so my friends and neighbors sent me a letter, said, you're going to serve. And I said, I'd rather serve in the Navy than I would the Army.
Now, you're talking about getting a draft notice, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So before you go there, though, what were you doing working for the railroad as a...
I was a what they call junior engineer, working with track maintenance, new track installations, accidents, and anything else they wanted me to do. And the accidents were the ones that really bothered me, because I would go to work on a Sunday and come home Tuesday or Wednesday. Because the idea then was to get the tracks back in service. They couldn't have the tracks out of service for too long.
So you were basically a train wreck investigator.
Yes, that's true. Except I actually got the hammers and the sledgehammers and put spikes in the ground and the ties as well. We all worked together to try to get the tracks open.
You got your draft letter, but decided you'd go ahead and enlist.
I decided I was going to go ahead and enlist, and I applied for a commission because I had my bachelor's. And it didn't come through, and it didn't come through, and it didn't come through. So my deferment came to an end. They said, well, you're going in the Navy as enlisted. And since you're an engineer, we're going to put you in the Seabees and make you a plumber.
Okay, now that...
And that's what they did.
So what was the logic there?
I have no idea.
I was going to ask what were the recruiters think when you said, hey, I have a degree in engineering, what can I do for the Navy?
Yeah.
So
they never asked the question. They told me what they were going to do.
Okay, so you had to go to plumbing school.
I went to plumbing school in Oxnard, California, Port Hueneme, and was out there for about 3 months for the school, and then I got transferred to Mobile Construction Battalion, MCB 128 in Gulfport, Mississippi.
Okay, so then it started lining up for you. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a construction engineer, but you want me to be a plumber. Okay, I'll go do that. Now what? But so they moved you into your field.
No.
I
was a plumber the whole time. In Vietnam and
okay,
whatever.
Officially you were a
Officially, I was a plumber.
Right. But
I got the E5 as a plumber.
Okay. That's petty officer second class.
Yes.
Okay, you hit that pretty quickly, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay.
So anyway,
but you didn't really do
my radio. I never did days work in the Navy as a plumber. It's just part of what it was. So.
Right. We hear these stories sometimes, but yours is remarkable. So
it was remarkable.
So you were a plumber. Let's say you were a construction engineer who was made a plumber, but you were a plumber who didn't do any plumbing. You did construction engineering.
Right.
Okay. Somewhere there's military logic in that, I'm sure.
I'm sure.
Did you expect to go to Vietnam?
Well, after I was in the Seabees, I expected to go to Vietnam, and I was over in Vietnam within 6 months of coming active duty.
How long did you serve in country?
9 months.
9 months. All right. So do you remember the day you landed in Vietnam and you first set foot on the Vietnam soil?
Unfortunately, like it was yesterday, and I was scared. But I also took solace in the fact that there was 1,000 other people that were standing there with me that day. So I was not alone, and I used that to comfort me the whole tour. That was never alone, and it helped a little bit. But once you got used to Vietnam, because temperatures were wild and extreme, and it was basically hot all the time. When it got down to 80, you put your coats on because you were so cold. Your blood was so thin, and stuff like that. So, but it was also a time where we were transferred out to Quang Tri, Vietnam, and worked out of there, and also Dong Ha, Vietnam, which was a little bit closer to the shore.
Oh, let's talk about.
So we're about 30 miles inland.
Okay, so you landed first probably Da Nang.
Da Nang, yes.
Da Nang, okay. So you're walking across that airport tarmac in Da Nang. What are you feeling?
I was scared. That's the best way to describe it. And I looked all around. My eyes were wide and big, and it was a huge airport because Da Nang was like a big city at that point, and a lot of our military base stuff was there. It was kind of like what they would call the rear. It was not getting shot at nearly as much as other parts of the country were. They weren't out in the jungles or weren't out in the rice paddies, things like that. So it was the central deployment point.
But in your training to go to Vietnam, I'm sure you heard the stories, there's no safe place in Vietnam. So you may be on the biggest air base, but were you thinking that when you got off that aircraft?
No.
I don't know what's going to happen here.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Yeah, right. So you went to Quang Tri. Now that was up to the north near the demilitarized zone, the DMZ.
That's correct.
Right?
About 30 miles inland.
Okay. And what was your job when you got there?
My first job was working for the Navy Moore Station. We had didn't have cell phones and other type comforts like we have today. So in order to make a call back home, they had a system of Navy Moore stations. Ours was in Quang Tri, and we would make calls nightly to Hughes Aircraft in Arizona, and they would do a long distance call for the sailors. So the first thing we had to do was get their name and get the phone number they wanted to talk to, and then that would go in the system, and I would spend 20 minutes when we got on the air putting all that data in, and then calling up one by one. They would make the phone calls, and then I had to listen to phone calls and switch the switch so that the other one would be able to talk back, because amateur radio is only a one-sided affair. I talk or you talk. You can't talk at the same time.
So this was a service that was provided by the Navy for naval members, enlisted
not
men,
only
officers,
naval, but also Marines,
Army.
Anybody could come to that station and sign up and make a call.
And the Mars thing was just an abbreviated designation. That this actually wasn't a normal telephone call. This is like radio.
It's
over
amateur radio.
You hear me and back and forth, that kind
back
of thing.
and forth.
So you had to take turns talking.
Right.
But it's a way that they can make a free call.
Right.
Pre cell phone, back home to the parents or a girlfriend or in the States.
Right.
And so you were
the one switching the switch.
Okay, you were in charge of this thing, that type of communications when you first got in there. How long did you do that?
For about 2 months. And then the regular operator finally came and deployed, and then I got assigned to go to do testing for soils and concrete.
Okay, so you were then on basically with a road crew, building roads and bridges, or what?
Yes, that's what the other companies did. They built the things and buildings and all that. But basically, we built about 16 miles of Vietnam Route 1, following the old French railroad, because back then the railroad was the source for military with the French Foreign Legion. So we had, right alongside the railroad tracks, started building 16 miles of road and 7 bridges or 8 bridges. And as we would build the road, the tracks would disappear. Every morning we'd go to work and there would be less tracks. And they would steal them overnight. I don't know whether it was the Vietnamese or the North Vietnamese, but those tracks disappeared. They appeared in buildings for bridges for roofs and whatnot. It was amazing.
So you're saying the actual rails and the cross ties?
Right.
So they were basically, as you built this railroad, they would take it apart at night.
Right. We weren't building the railroad. We were building alongside of it.
Oh, okay, right.
But every morning when we go to work, there was less railroad. It was amazing. And they did not touch that until we were there, because they felt more comfort. Now, we had snipers out in the areas, and the worst thing we had were leeches in the rice paddies to build over these bridges, and it was a mess. So on a day-to-day basis, so just describe what a typical day would have been for you, maybe building a bridge over rice paddies. Well, typical day, because I was in a laboratory and I did soils testing. I would go out with the Army and on a tank and get soil samples after they sprayed Agent Orange, and then bring them back and analyze them and set up charts for compaction testing. And then got sand samples to make concrete. And the same thing, we would then test the concrete for compressive strength.
Okay. Now, and you told me as we were talking earlier before the program that out there in the bush, where you would think you might really be taking some fire, you really didn't take fire, but you did take fire in your base.
That's correct.
So we want to talk about that when we come back.
Military Memoirs is produced by the United Bank Center for Military and Veteran Studies at Coastal Carolina University and is made possible in part by the Lieutenant Tab Stogner Horry County Veterans Oral History Project, which is named in honor of the late H. Otis Tab Stogner, Jr., a World War II veteran of the United States Army. The project records and preserves oral history with Horry County veterans.
They're all around us. They're the men and women who served in our nation's armed forces. In good times and bad, they've been willing to stand in harm's way to preserve, protect, and defend the legacy of freedom we enjoy as Americans. All of them gave some, and some of them gave all. We owe them a lot. So the next time you see an American veteran, say thank you for all of us.
The United Bank Center for Military and Veteran Studies preserves oral history from American veterans of all service branches, including the U.S. Coast Guard. The Hack Mintz U.S. Coast Guard Oral History Project is named in honor of the late Henry Hack Mintz, a longtime resident of Myrtle Beach who held 3 U.S. Coast Guard commands. The Hack Mintz U.S. Coast Guard Oral History Project, a key component of the United Bank Center for Military and Veteran Studies.
Hello and welcome back to Military Memoirs. We're talking to Mr. Roger McGuigan, who was in the Seabees, the U.S. Navy Seabees in Vietnam, kind of at the height of things there. You were there in 1969, you were saying. So you're out there building bridges and roads and all this construction necessary to support the war effort to protect South Vietnam, and that takes you out in the bush. But you were telling me you really didn't get shot at much or at all out in the bush.
That's correct.
Which is kind of odd, but you did come under fire at your
Back
home
on the base.
Yeah. So what was the first time you came under fire?
I was working for the Navy Mars Station at that point, and I had just come out of the restroom, which we will not talk about, and first thing I heard was a bullet sailing right over my head, and then a pow. And it cleared me by about 6 inches, I would guess, and it scared the tar out of me. So I went right back in that restroom again, sat there for a half an hour thinking about life or thinking about what's going to happen. And with the rest of the time, because that was early on in the tour.
This was at Quang Tri?
This was at Quang Tri, yes.
All right, so you're based there with the Seabees.
Yes.
And going about your normal duties, and you explained what that was with the Mars and taking the telephone calls and all that.
Yep.
So you visit the latrine and you come out and somebody's shooting at you?
Yes, it was a sniper. And so he missed. Thank goodness. Otherwise,
so
I was just sitting here talking to you today. It was a sniper.
Okay. So you understood that right away.
It's not rocket science.
Right. So was this a common occurrence?
No.
All right.
Very, very rare.
So anything's happened? Somebody just kind of worked their way up onto the base?
They were not on the base. They were off the base. But the base was kind of in a little valley of sorts, and it was above rice paddy level, so it was pretty dry. But they took a shot, and they almost got me.
Right. You reported this?
No.
No? Okay, that's just what happens.
It's just what happened, and it's the way you had to treat life. And being on base, I did not have my flak jacket on, which is what I always had on out on the roads when we're working on the roads. But at this point, it was like you're home from work at night, and this is your house.
So your closest call wasn't working in the bush; it was
right
at your base. Was that kind of typical of Vietnam in some ways?
Where I was, and the time I was, most of the Vietnam War was fought by the military police. Believe it or not, they were the ones that would go out. We were out one day working on the road, and we stopped by an old French railroad station. And we're sitting there with our sea rations eating lunch, and down comes a sweep. It was Army and military police, and they were sweeping for a sniper about a half mile from where we were down in the valley, and they were walking about 3 feet apart down through here trying to flush the sniper out. But they were there, and we were there, but they never shot at us. They never felt that we were, I guess, an enemy to them until night, and then they would shoot rockets in the base. But you're there, and you always have a sense of it, and you always have your flak jacket on, but it's totally different. We were in a what would you call rear-type circumstance as opposed to the major war out in the jungles and in the swamps in Thailand and whatnot. We were totally in the rear. So they would have these snipers come in, or we would have rockets at night.
Well, talk about that for a second. So you're at your base and you're drawing fire from rockets?
Yes. Vietnamese or North Vietnamese would shoot rockets into the base at night, and we had, if I remember correctly, 6 of our battalion killed by a rocket that directly landed onto their hut.
So do you remember the first time you took rocket fire?
It was the first night I was there in Vietnam, the country. And it went downhill from there.
Well, what did you think about that? I mean, were you prepared? Were you warned when you came in?
We had what was called a Class 1C hut. That's a Navy term for the way they built the structures to live in for the base. And there was a trench underneath they dug with a backhoe, and they put trapdoors in the floor. So as soon as either you heard the rocket or you heard the alarm, you would drop down into this trench and hopefully be safe there except for a direct hit. And I spent many a night in the trenches.
So would these things come in barrages, or one at a time, or
one at a time,
or what?
Maybe 5 or 6 a night.
So just about the time you thought, well, maybe I can go get back in my bunk,
they would shoot another one.
Right. So how did you get used to that?
You don't. You just live with it.
Well, how did you feel the first time this happened?
I was scared. No question about that. It didn't make your sleeping any better either.
Yeah, what's there's an old line, I think it came out of earlier wars, but veterans would often say that if you're not scared when you're in a combat zone, then you're either dumb or you're a liar.
Yes, that's correct. And there was no question about it, I was scared. Also, within our base, we were 30 miles inland, and the New Jersey, battleship New Jersey was lobbing shells over our base offshore. And they would land, and the rifling on the New Jersey was so worn out that they were giving them 3-mile target circles, and we were in the 3 miles.
Well, let's back up
and they
a
were
second.
far louder than the rockets that the North Vietnamese sent.
Well, yeah, and that's extraordinary. So, USS New Jersey battleship, that was a battleship from World War II.
Right.
So they brought in this battleship from World War II and put it offshore, and that's how they were protecting some of the defense installations and
They were trying to bomb the North Vietnamese. They were given targets for where they thought they were.
So they're holding them back from coming in with this fire from a battleship off the coast. How far off would that have been?
Well, we were 30 miles inland, so that is a testimony to how a battleship works and the size of the bullets that they basically were sending.
Well, I hope those big naval shells, I hope they were accurate.
They weren't.
They weren't.
But they didn't hit us. And we were in the target zone.
And you could tell the difference between that and the rocket.
Oh, big time. It was like 14 times as loud.
All right, so you're out in the bush where you'd think you're going to be drawing all kind of fire, and you're not.
Right.
Then you're back at your base, and the
snipers.
You got snipers, Viet Cong or NVA, and then you've got rockets that are incoming all the time. And then there's also some danger of friendly fire coming in from the New Jersey.
Yes.
Okay, so that didn't give you a lot of sleep, did it?
No, it did not. They didn't have the term for it when I come home from Vietnam, but it's what they call PS whatever today.
Well, back in earlier wars,
they didn't know what it was.
Shell shock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so did you have to deal with some of that?
Yes, a lot of it.
Can you talk about it?
I'd prefer not to.
That's fine.
I kept trying to crawl through the floor and find my trapdoor.
Right.
That was a big thing at night. I was a sleepwalker, and I tried to find that trapdoor.
Right. But you took casualties from this too. You're telling me.
Yeah, we had 6 killed in our battalion.
Right, and more wounded presumably. So your day-to-day work then, so you get through the night at the base, and then you climb on the back of a tank.
Yes. In the morning we would have an Army tank, and we would go out. They would spray Agent Orange, and then we would go out and get soil samples and analyze them for compaction and for other things, or stone for making concrete, or sand. Vietnamese had a unique sand that was called running sand. It was all uniform gradation. It was all the same size particles. And it did not make really great concrete because of the way it was structured. It was not little pieces and large pieces. It was all the same size pieces. And so we had to be very careful when we were making concrete to make sure we had compressive strength that was going to hold it up when it was cured.
So what do you think was the hardest part of your job over there in doing what you had to do?
Having to put up with officers.
Well, that sounds like an enlisted man.
Yes.
So when you collected these soil samples,
mm-hmm.
And you were talking about Agent Orange being spread all over the place, so I mean that was like another form of friendly fire. Almost.
In a way, you're right.
Yeah, so the Agent Orange has become notorious.
Mm-hmm.
They're out there trying to kill underbrush, if I understand this right. The idea was spray this thing on the underbrush, kills the underbrush, and then the enemy can't get in close to us, and we have some more control.
Yes.
Okay.
That's basically this
but
concept.
it turned out to be poison.
Yes.
Not just for the plants, but for people.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were taking soil samples,
I was doing everything but eating it.
Okay, right. So you had to. Was that a problem later on for you?
It was a huge problem. I started having heart trouble while I was still active duty in the service, and from that point, then through my adult life, I've had heart issues almost the rest of my life. This point, at 55 years old, I had open heart surgery and had grafts put in, and the grafts failed. Plus, I had other blockages, both in my neck and my heart. And I've had heart catheterization now, I think 7 times, open heart surgery, stents. I had 1 heart attack, and that was only like after I retired. I actually had the first heart attack.
You finished up your tour, 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
So as that got closer to you, going home, what were your thoughts then?
I was happy to go home.
Yeah.
But I was used to Vietnam at the time. That's about the way you would describe it. You're never at a war zone ever happy about it, but you're used to it. You can anticipate and expect things that are going to happen, so then you work around that to give you some level of comfort.
Right. So when you look back from where you are now at that time, at 9 months, well, for your 4 years in service, in uniform, and that 9 months in Vietnam, what are your thoughts and feelings as you look back at that?
The events happened over 50 years ago, and it's like yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how else to describe it. That's why I can sit here and talk to you the way I am, because it's like yesterday.
Vivid memories.
It's vivid memories, and it's memories that both are good and bad. The camaraderie of the people that were in the same boat with you, so to speak, was important. So the people around you were important, and they were a crutch for you to be able to do things. Being in the Seabees, we had the best food in the Navy, so we think. Found out they actually arrested the cook because he was trading food. I was wondering why we had roast beef 7 days a week, because he was trading the chicken and the turkey and the other types of meats with Vietnamese. So that's another story for another time. But it's that being together that helps. So we had a Class 1C hut which had about 14 people in it, and that was our home for 9 months. And we didn't have to do our own laundry. We had other people do it for us, so it was amazing. So we ended up pretty good.
Right. Right.
And I made friends, and I still have friends, and I still go to reunions of MCB 128 down in Gulfport. The next one will be next year. So.
Yeah. Well, and that's really a remarkable story, and you were in a unique position being in the Seabees.
Yes.
And so do you look back? Is there a feeling of accomplishment? There should be.
The one thing we built when we were over there was 16 miles of road and 7 bridges. And the night we were getting ready to pack up to leave was the night that the Vietnamese bombed all the bridges and or blew up all the bridges. So 9 months worth of work was now down the toilet, so to speak.
So
in a way, you're right. Yeah, I had some satisfaction.
We're pulling out. They're taking over. The North Vietnamese are coming down and pressing them, so they start blowing up everything to slow down the North Vietnamese, basically.
No. The North Vietnamese blew up the bridges.
Oh, the North Vietnamese got in and did
they're the ones that blew up the bridges.
So because the protection was gone.
Yep.
Right.
And there was a battalion replaced us and had to rebuild the bridges again.
So how did you feel about that when you?
Well, it was like all this part of my life, and this is what happened.
Right, but that's war.
Yeah, it's war.
Yeah. Well, and so you came back home and started a life all anew. Went back to college, got more education, construction engineer, opened your own company and ran it with a consultant. Built schools all over the place in Pennsylvania. Married to a wonderful woman, had 4 daughters, and just look at all that, and finally retired, and here you are down in Myrtle Beach.
Right.
Well, that's a remarkable story, and I really do appreciate you so much sharing it with us, and it's been a real honor to have you here on this program.
Well, thank you.
So we want to thank you also for joining us for Military Memoirs.
The preceding program is made possible by the generous support of these sponsors. Conway Ford, dedicated to serving our communities and our veterans in Horry, Georgetown, and Marion counties. By PGBA, the health claims processor for the American Armed Forces, serving those who serve us. And by United Bank, with full-service banking for our community and our veterans from convenient locations.